My name is Wade. I am 38 years old, and today, I just opened a very expensive bottle of wine. I'm not celebrating an anniversary. I'm celebrating a news report from the courthouse. The man who turned 2 years of my life into a living hell was just denied parole. What I'm about to tell you is the story of the nightmare he put me through. It all started 10 years ago after my 4-year marriage ended. I moved to Asheville, a peaceful mountain town in North Carolina, to start over. I worked as a bartender at a local spot where I met all kinds of people. I became friends with a kind couple who ran a horse rescue. They were good people, and through them, I met Gavin. At the time, Gavin worked at my friend's rescue ranch. He had a rugged look and talked a bit rough, but I just thought he was a straightforward guy. One night, after having a few too many drinks, we had a one-night stand. It should have ended right there. I really didn't have any interest in a relationship with him, but he felt differently. Over the next few weeks, I received roses from a secret admirer on 3 separate occasions. At first, I thought it was a sweet romantic gesture, but it quickly turned creepy. When he finally reached out and realized I'd received the flowers, he bluntly told me that because he had spent so much money on them, I owed him. I was absolutely shocked. If he had been a gentleman, I might have actually considered a real date. But the way he demanded intimacy just because he spent money made me feel like I was just a product to him. I got angry and told him exactly how I felt. He immediately snapped, calling me names and accusing me of being a tease. I didn't hold back either. I told him off and hung up, thinking that was the end of it. Then, the tense run-ins began. About 2 weeks later, I was out with friends when we ran into him at a bar. He was wasted, and he acted like he'd forgotten everything that happened. When I told him to stay away, he got aggressive and even groped me. I immediately told security, and they kicked him out of the bar. I was terrified he would try to get back at me, so I asked a guard to walk me to my car. Just as I feared, he was waiting for me in the parking lot. Thankfully, because of the security guard, I made it away safely. The breaking point happened on a rainy night. He showed up at my house, sobbing hysterically outside my door. He was begging me for a chance to fix our serious relationship. He was so delusional that he believed one night together meant we were in eternal love. I had to call the police to force him to leave. After that night, he vanished. I thought the nightmare was finally over. However, stalkers never truly leave. They just step back and wait for a more devastating moment to strike. By this time, I had a new boyfriend. We had been together for 6 months, and he had recently moved in with me. One evening, we were sitting on the couch watching TV when we heard a violent pounding at the door. My boyfriend stood up to see who it was when the door was kicked so hard the entire frame shattered. Gavin charged in like a wild animal, brandishing a handgun. His eyes were bloodshot, and he reeked of alcohol. The second he saw my boyfriend, he pulled the trigger without saying a word. My boyfriend collapsed after the first shot. In a state of pure terror, I bolted for the bathroom, locked the door, and dove into the bathtub. I heard at least 3 more gunshots in the living room along with his slurred cursing. I was certain the man I loved was dead. I tried to keep it together and felt for my phone. Luckily, it was still in my pocket. I shakily dialed 911 while he continued to scream outside the door. He began firing rounds into the bathroom door and the lock. I didn't dare make a sound. I lay flat in the bottom of the tub, hoping the cast iron would shield me if he shot through the walls. Waiting for the police felt like waiting for a death sentence. Fortunately, I heard sirens very quickly. I heard the police shouting, the sound of a struggle, and then total silence. A miracle happened. My boyfriend was still alive. Gavin was so drunk that his hands were shaking. 2 bullets hit my boyfriend, but they both missed his vital organs. He was rushed to the ER and made a miraculous recovery. At the trial, Gavin stood there looking pathetic and thin, nothing like the monster from that night. Because he had a long list of prior crimes, he was sentenced to 10 to 25 years in prison. My boyfriend and I celebrated that news with a wedding. We have been together for almost 10 years now. A relationship that started with a literal bang turned out to be the strongest bond of my life. Today, Hearing that his parole was denied, I feel like I can finally breathe again after a decade of holding my breath. We are already planning a long vacation to celebrate this peace of mind. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you. MHS crossed over 10,000 subscribers in 2025, and that's all because of you. Every single view, like, and share means the world to me. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. This year, we're setting our sights on 50,000 in 2026. So if you enjoy these videos and haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that button, join the community, let's grow this together. Now, back to the stories. My name is Bianca. I'm 23 years old and I live and work in Texas. If you met me during the day, you would see an energetic barista who always has a polite smile for her customers. But after a terrifying Wednesday night last week, I realized that politeness can sometimes be a trap, and acting crazy can be your most powerful, life-saving weapon. My shift usually ends at 10 p.m. My apartment is only about a 10-minute walk from the coffee shop. Because it's so close, I choose to walk to save money. I always felt confident that I could protect myself because I stayed on the main roads with bright streetlights and plenty of traffic. That night, I finished work like usual and started my walk home. But not long after I left the shop, I got a strange feeling. I felt like someone was behind me. I kept walking but glanced quickly over my shoulder. About 15 feet behind me was a man. He was dressed in dark clothes. I kept moving and tried to act normal since he hadn't done anything dangerous yet. A few minutes later, I peeked back again. I realized he was keeping the exact same pace and distance as me. I stayed calm, thinking it might just be a coincidence. To test it, I turned onto a different street, a smaller one, but still well lit. My heart skipped a beat when I heard his footsteps follow me around the corner. I decided to take a defensive step. I pretended to pull out my phone and stopped for a few seconds, as if I were reading a text message. Then, I suddenly turned around and headed back toward the main road. As I brushed past him, my heart nearly stopped. I could feel how big and tall he was. I felt certain that if he grabbed me, I wouldn't stand a chance. He quickly turned around and followed me back to the main road. Now I was certain I was being stalked. His footsteps rang out steadily behind me. In the silence of the late night, that sound felt like death knocking on my door. My palms were so sweaty that my phone was slipping in my hand. I looked around, hoping to see anyone who could help, but the street was eerily empty. Suddenly, he sped up to close the gap and spoke. "Hey there, beautiful." I didn't dare look back. I forced my body to stop shaking. I ignored him and put my phone to my ear, pretending to be on a call. "Hey, I'm on the main road. You'll be here in a minute, right?" I said. I tried to keep my voice from trembling. I hoped he would back off if he thought I wasn't alone. But his reaction was completely unexpected. He let out a loud laugh that made me freeze. "Nice acting, sweetheart," he sneered. "But I'm a pretty good director myself. I know you're all alone." In that moment, I felt paralyzed. My usual escape plan had been ripped to shreds. I felt a wave of cold fear rise from my feet, making my legs feel weak. I felt like I was going to collapse and beg for mercy. That was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to see me cry. He wanted to hear me plead. He wanted me to play the role of the weak prey so he could have total control. But right then, something inside me snapped. A primal rage washed over my fear. I realized that if I kept acting like a normal, polite person, I wasn't going to make it home tonight. I stood up straight and whipped around to face him. Instead of a crying face, I bared my teeth and widened my eyes until they looked bloodshot. I started twitching my body in a bizarre, jerky way. Then, I took a deep breath and barked at the top of my lungs. "Woof! Woof woof! Bark, bark, bark!" He stopped dead in his tracks. That disgusting smirk froze on his face. I didn't stop. I took jerky, lunging steps toward him, staring him down with wild eyes. I purposefully let spit fly from my mouth and barked like a rabid dog having a seizure. "Woof! Bark, 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 bark!" He backed away. "You're crazy. What's wrong with you?" Then, as if he was afraid my insanity was contagious, he turned around and walked away as fast as he could. He didn't look back once. As soon as he disappeared, my entire body went limp. My arms and legs shook so hard I could barely stand. I was gasping for air because I was so exhausted, but I forced myself to run the rest of the way home. When I got inside, I locked every bolt on the door, closed the curtains tight, and collapsed onto the cold floor. I started sobbing. I cried to let out all the extreme stress I had been holding in. I had saved myself in a way that wasn't exactly normal. The next day, I shared my experience online and learned an interesting biological term: diametic behavior. In nature, when a weaker animal is cornered, it will suddenly change its appearance, make piercing noises, or act in a bizarre way to confuse the predator. A predator wants a predictable hunt, not a confrontation with unpredictable chaos. A lot of women replied to my post with similar script-breaking stories. One woman pretended to vomit. Another started talking loudly about having explosive diarrhea. Some even faked seizures or started babbling in made-up languages. Harassers crave control. When you become crazy, you take that power away from them. They don't know how to handle someone who refuses to follow social norms. I learned a hard lesson that night. Never be afraid to be weird to protect yourself. Politeness is a virtue, but in a dark alley, it can be a death sentence. I don't walk home anymore. I always carry pepper spray now, and I've joined a martial arts class. But the strongest weapon I carry is my willingness to let go of my image and get crazy whenever I need to. Just remember, bad guys might not be afraid of the police immediately, but they are terrified of a woman they can't control. I 10 out of 10 recommend forgetting your dignity if it means staying safe. My name is Maya. 7 years ago, when I was 22, I made a mistake born out of kindness and a bit of naivety. I truly believed that everyone deserved to be treated with compassion. At the time, I was a senior majoring in fine arts at the University of Illinois. The story began on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in a coffee shop with my best friend, Brad. We were discussing our final senior project when a beautiful opera melody drifted in from the window. It was clear, powerful, and full of emotion. I looked out of curiosity and saw a man who appeared to be homeless sitting on the curb, singing his heart out. I told Brad how incredible his voice was, but Brad didn't seem to care. He just shrugged it off. When we left the shop, I stopped by the man, pulled out a $10 bill, and dropped it into his hat. He stopped singing, opened his eyes, and smiled at me. "Thank you, young lady. You have a beautiful smile," he said. After that, I ran into him a few more times on street corners and near the subway station. Every time I saw him, I stopped to chat. I learned his name was Todd, and he was 53. He told me he used to be a promising opera singer, but after his wife died of cancer, he spiraled into substance abuse and lost everything. I saw Todd as a forgotten artist's soul rather than a threat. To me, he was a person, not a problem. Todd started giving me small gifts during our next few encounters. A wildflower picked from the roadside, or a small, smooth stone he found. They were sweet in their own way, and it always warmed my heart to receive them. Brad was visibly uncomfortable after watching me linger to talk to Todd. He warned me that I should just offer help, not build a friendship with a homeless man I didn't truly know. I disagreed with Brad's cynical view. I kept doing what I thought was right and kind. Then March 2020 arrived, and the world changed forever. COVID-19 hit, and Chicago went into lockdown. Classes moved online. I decided to move back home to Traverse City, Michigan to stay with my parents. I figured the 400-mile distance would naturally end this strange chapter. Until one night, Brad sent me a DM on Instagram. It was a video of a man singing opera right in the middle of downtown Traverse City. My heart stopped when I recognized him. It was Todd. "I ran into some people near your old hangout last week," Brad texted. "They said a homeless guy has been going around asking about you. He knew your name, your major, and even your home address in Traverse City." I was confused and shaken by Brad's message. He told me to call the police, but I brushed it off, thinking it had to be a huge coincidence. But when I told my parents, they had the same worried reaction as Brad. They decided it was best for me to go stay with my older brother, Ethan, in Columbus, Ohio, just to be safe. I agreed and went along with the plan, figuring it was just a good excuse to visit family. After I had been in Columbus for a week, I was home alone one afternoon when the doorbell started ringing repeatedly. I looked out the second-floor window down at the front porch. I realized it was Todd, but what shocked me was how clean he looked. He was well-groomed, wearing decent clothes, nothing like the homeless man I knew. I felt a wave of dread. How did he find me? Why did he look like this? Was Brad right all along? Todd kept knocking persistently. Suddenly, he looked up and spotted me. His eyes lit up instantly, and he broke into a massive, radiant smile. "Found you! Come on out, my dearest Maya!" He stood on his tiptoes and waved his hands frantically. I shivered and backed away from the window, but Todd didn't stop. "I spent every penny I begged for to get this look just for you," he shouted. I slammed the window shut and called my brother immediately. Outside, Todd started singing opera, intense, romantic songs of devotion. It made my skin crawl. About 10 minutes later, my brother Ethan pulled into the driveway. I stood by the living room window to listen, too scared to go out. Todd kept introducing himself as my boyfriend, while Ethan told him to leave immediately. Ethan has a short fuse, and the situation escalated fast. Todd moved toward the door, but Ethan blocked him. They started shoving each other. In a split second, Todd spun around and punched his fist right through the glass window I was standing behind. The sound of shattering glass was deafening. Blood splattered everywhere from Todd's hand. He saw me through the broken pane, and his eyes glazed over with madness. "My sweet Maya, I'm here. I couldn't stand seeing you so close to that Brad guy. Only I truly understand you." I collapsed onto the floor, screaming in a total panic as I saw his bloody hand reaching through the broken glass, trying to fumble for the door lock. Thankfully, the police arrived seconds later because Ethan had called them on his way home. It took 3 officers to tackle and handcuff Todd while he was in a blind rage. His hand was soaked in blood, but he had a terrifying, eerie smile on his face as he began to sing opera again. As the patrol car pulled away, his voice echoed down the street until it faded into the distance. I'm still shaken up by what happened. It's hard to believe that a simple act of kindness led to such a terrifying situation. I've realized that while empathy is important, blind trust can be dangerous. Not everyone who has suffered is harmless. Most importantly, I learned that no matter how much I want to help others, I have to keep myself safe first. My name is Hannah. I'm 22 years old, and I just graduated with a degree in environmental science from UC Berkeley. The story I'm about to tell happened a few months ago. At the time, I was part of a conservation program called AmeriCorps. It was a 2-year commitment in a very remote town in the American West. I had decided to take a break from my studies to get some real-world field experience. The town was tucked away between massive cliffs and open fields. There was only one 50-mile highway that connected us to the nearest big city. It was a total dead zone. There was no cell service, no streetlights, and only a few random farmhouses miles away from the road. It happened late one night in December after I finished watching a horror movie at the theater. It was past 11 p.m. I was driving home alone on a 10-mile stretch of road that twisted through barren hills and thin forests. On the way back, I stopped at the only gas station still open at that hour to fill up my tank. As soon as I pulled in, I got a bad feeling. The place was dark, and the flickering fluorescent lights were creepy. It reminded me exactly of the horror movie I had just seen. I pumped my gas, paid, and got back in the car. That's when I noticed a black Jeep parked at the pump next to me. At first, it looked like a normal car, but what made my skin crawl was the driver. He was staring at me intensely through his windshield. It was the kind of look you only see in movies about serial killers or kidnappings. I left the gas station quickly. In my rearview mirror, I saw the black Jeep pull out at the exact same time. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was just heading home too. But when the Jeep kept a perfect distance behind me, no matter how fast or slow I went, I started to get really scared. After following me for about 2 miles, the Jeep suddenly sped up. He roared past me and disappeared over a hill up ahead. I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I told myself I was just being dramatic and overthinking things. But as I crested the hill, my heart sank. The Jeep was pulled over on the shoulder with its headlights shining bright. The driver was leaning his arm out the window, waving his hand frantically as if he had a major emergency and needed help. For a split second, my mind raced. I didn't stop, but I hesitated. What if he actually broke down? What if someone was really hurt? Then I remembered the way he stared at me at the gas station. I decided not to stop. I kept my speed steady and looked straight ahead. As I passed him, I caught a glimpse of him. He was a pretty big guy. I kept checking my taillights in the mirror. Just as I was about to go around a curve, the Jeep suddenly lurched forward. He sped up and closed the gap between us instantly. I was shocked. His car clearly wasn't broken. I realized my gut feeling had been right all along. The guy wouldn't give up. He got right on my bumper, then sped past me again and stopped dead in the middle of the road. He leaned out the window and started waving me down again. This creep was definitely playing a game. I gritted my teeth, gripped the steering wheel tight, and floored it. I swerved around him without even looking his way. When he saw that I still wouldn't stop, the man turned absolutely aggressive. He began tailgating me so closely that I couldn't even see his headlights in my mirror. Then, he did something terrifying. He turned off his lights completely. In the pitch-black mountain night, all I could hear was the roar of his engine right behind me. He started honking his horn non-stop and flashing his brights to blind me, all while waving his arm out the window to force me to pull over. The chase lasted for over 30 minutes. It was the longest 30 minutes of my life. The mountain road was winding, with a cliff on one side and a deep drop-off on the other. One small bump from behind, and I would have disappeared into the canyon, and no one would have ever known. My phone was in my bag on the passenger seat, but I didn't dare take my hands off the wheel for even a second. I could feel cold sweat running down my back. My left hand was white-knuckled on the wheel, while my right hand scrambled to find my pocket knife in the center console. I flicked the blade open and put it on my lap. I told myself, if he forces me to stop, I'm not going down without a fight. My head was spinning with scenes from every highway horror movie I'd ever seen. The road was so empty that I didn't see a single car coming the other way. I was completely on my own. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it ended. As I got close to the turnoff for my town, the Jeep slammed on its brakes. I heard the tires screech against the pavement. In the mirror, I saw him pull a 180-degree U-turn and floor it back into the darkness. I sped up and didn't stop until I reached my driveway. I ran inside and locked every single bolt on the door. I didn't calm down until almost sunrise, which is when I finally fell asleep. The next day, I told my friends what happened. Everyone had a different opinion. The most ridiculous one came from my friend Sarah. She said, "Maybe he just wanted to return some money or a receipt you dropped at the gas station." I told her that chasing someone for half an hour, turning off your lights, and honking like a maniac is not how a good person acts. I called the police and described the Jeep and the man. They told me they didn't have enough information to open an investigation. They just told me to be more careful at night and to always keep my phone nearby. 3 months later, I was getting ready to move out of town to go back to Berkeley. Right before I left, Sarah told me some shocking news. The black Jeep had been pulled over and the driver was arrested. It wasn't because of my case, though. He had tried to follow a group of 4 men who were driving to work early in the morning. This time, they managed to get his license plate number. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders knowing he was caught. When he was chasing me, I was sure he was a predator targeting women. But after hearing what happened with the 4 men, I started to think differently. Maybe he was just mentally ill and got a thrill out of scaring people. There was no way he could have taken on 4 grown men at once. Whatever his reason was, I'm just lucky I stayed safe. I learned my lesson. I will never drive or go out alone late at night ever again.
My name is Adam. I'm 36 years old. I live a simple life, working as a supervisor at a warehouse in suburban Pennsylvania. I never thought I would become the victim of someone's madness on my usual drive home. That afternoon, I was driving my Ford pickup truck home after a long 10-hour shift. The sunset turned the road golden. The radio was playing a slow country song. I just wanted to get home and sit on my living room sofa. As I drove through a few blocks, I noticed a gray sedan behind me. At first, I thought we were just taking the same route. A few minutes later, at an intersection, the car was still there. I decided to test it. I tapped my brakes and slowed down to see if I was just being paranoid. The car behind me slowed down immediately. When I turned a corner, I took a quick look. I saw a woman behind the wheel. She looked exhausted. Her hair was in a high bun. In the back seat, 3 kids were crowded together. I thought maybe she was just headed in the same direction as me. I sped up and passed a few slow cars in the left lane. To my surprise, the gray sedan changed lanes too. It stayed right on my tail like a shadow. A strange feeling started to grow inside me. Why would a mother with 3 small kids act like a stalker? I saw a 7-Eleven sign ahead. I decided to pull into the parking lot. At least that would prove if this was a coincidence or if something was really wrong. But as soon as I came to a full stop, there was a violent crash from behind. My whole truck shook. The impact threw me forward. I felt like I was being ripped out of my seat. If my seatbelt hadn't held me back, I probably would have hit the windshield. I opened my door and stepped out. When I turned around, I froze. It was the same gray sedan. It was pinned against the back of my truck. The right headlight was smashed. Smoke was rising from the hood. I stood there, my head spinning. I couldn't believe she actually rammed into me. The woman got out of her car. She wasn't scared or sorry at all. She ran toward me. Her eyes were wide. Her pupils were so dilated it was terrifying. "Why are you following me? Why are you stalking me and my kids?" she screamed. Her voice was raspy and ear-piercing. I stood there in shock. Common sense didn't apply here. "What are you talking about? You're the one who was following me. You just hit my truck. Don't lie to me. I saw you slow down to look at me. Then you sped up to run away when I caught you," she shrieked. She stepped closer. I realized that in her world, my self-defense was proof of my guilt. I held up my hands to try to calm her down. I tried to stay as steady as possible. "Look, this is a big misunderstanding. I'm just on my way home from work." Before I could finish, a painful punch hit my left cheek. I stumbled back. I could taste the metallic flavor of blood in my mouth. "Stupid man! You think you can stalk people and get away with it?" she yelled in my face with pure hatred. While we waited for the police, she wouldn't stop rambling. She kept pointing her finger at me and screaming nonsense. "I knew it. You people are always watching me. You're sick." Her voice was a raspy hiss. People in the parking lot started to stop and stare. I stayed still and kept my distance. The 3 kids sat in her car, staring out with expressionless faces. It gave me the creeps. When the police officer arrived, he quickly separated us to take our statements. The woman kept accusing me with stories that made no sense. "She has a very serious mental health issue," I told the officer when he came back to me. "She didn't even care about the lives of her 3 kids in the car. She just rammed into me because of a delusion. The officer nodded. He looked sympathetic, but also helpless. After the paperwork was done, I got back into my truck. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. I could still taste the blood from her punch. In the rearview mirror, I saw her still pointing at me and arguing with the cops. The 3 kids were still sitting quietly in the dark car. I drove away, but the look in her eyes and the silence of those kids haunted me the whole way home. I still don't understand why I became a target for that madness. I was just at the wrong place at the wrong time on a normal road. What haunts me isn't just her wild eyes. It's the creepy silence of those kids. It was like they were used to these outbursts. The scariest thing is when you become a villain in someone else's broken world, and there is no way to protect yourself. This story happened back when I was 9 years old, living in Kentucky with my mom. It started out as a normal Tuesday. My best friend was home sick with the flu, so for the first time in a long while, I had to walk home from school by myself. My route took me across 2 busy intersections and through a quiet stretch near a park. About 10 minutes after leaving the school gates, I noticed a tall figure behind me. At first, I tried to stay calm, telling myself he was just heading the same way. But when I turned left, he turned left. When I slowed down to pretend to tie my shoelace, he stopped about 30 feet away and pretended to look at his phone. My chest started to tighten. I remembered what my mom always told me. Always trust your gut. Your safety is the most important thing. To check if I was really being followed, I ducked into a small convenience store nearby. I walked in and picked out a pack of peppermint candies, but my eyes kept darting toward the window. My worst fear was confirmed. The man appeared outside the store, pacing back and forth. I tried to act natural. I bought the candy and walked out. When I left, the man was still there. As I walked away, he started following me again. I started to panic and sped up, and he sped up too. I wanted to sprint, but I was afraid that if I ran, he would chase me, and I wouldn't be able to get away. I decided to keep up appearances. I usually took a shortcut with my friends to get home faster, but that day I chose the main road because there were more cars and people. Every few yards, I would wave or say hi to people walking by, pretending I knew them. I thought this would make me more visible and discourage him from trying anything. The walk from the store to my home had never felt so long. Finally, I reached my apartment building, but he was right on my heels and quietly slipped into the lobby right behind me. At this point, he stopped pretending. His terrifying gaze was fixed directly on me. The lobby suddenly felt suffocating. It was just me and this stranger. He wasn't looking at his phone anymore. He was just staring. I walked toward the elevator. My finger almost touched the call button, but a jolt of fear shot through my brain. In a split second, I changed my mind. I slowed down and walked toward the metal mailboxes in the corner instead. "Oh, I need to check the mail for Mom," I mumbled loud enough for him to hear. I stood there, pretending to fumble for my keys, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped my backpack. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him waiting by the elevators. He wasn't in a rush. He knew I had no other way to get upstairs except by passing him. His patience was my only chance. The moment he looked up at the digital display to see which floor the elevator was on, I took a deep breath, spun around, and bolted for the front door. I shoved the lobby door open and ran for my life toward the parking lot outside. I heard the door slam behind me and the sound of heavy footsteps chasing me. Just then, Mr. Martin, a neighbor from across the hall, was getting out of his car after work. I lunged at him and grabbed his arm, crying and laughing at the same time because I was so scared. "Mr. Martin, someone is chasing me." Mr. Martin froze, and his face went from confused to dead serious. He looked toward the lobby. The man had just poked his head out the door, but when he saw me standing next to a large, grown man, he immediately stopped, turned around, and slunk away into the shadows. Mr. Martin walked me up to my apartment and waited until my mom got home. When she heard the story, she pulled me into a hug and started crying. That same night, she called the building management and the police to pull the security footage. The CCTV showed everything. The man following me from the street into the lobby, waiting for me at the elevator, and then chasing me out the door. It was undeniable proof. My mom used the footage to file a report with the local police. It turned out the man was mentally unstable and under a doctor's care, but had stopped taking his medication. Even scarier, he had a history of stalking and harassing children in other neighborhoods. Because of what happened to me, he was placed in a secure mental health facility for mandatory treatment under tight security. To this day, I still shiver when I remember that man's eyes and the sheer terror of that afternoon. But I didn't let that fear break me. I turned it into a lesson. Now, I am a mother myself with a young daughter. I've taught her that the world has many good people, but it also has hidden dangers. I taught her that sometimes being polite or well-behaved has to take a back seat to survival. If you're scared, run. If you're suspicious, scream for help. 12 years have passed since that night, but I still can't forget the look in his eyes when he was looking at us from the shadows. Every time someone mentions camping, my heart beats faster. Those images come rushing back as if they had just happened. It was the last week of summer before I went back to the University of Texas, Austin. I was 20, and Jess and Katie were both 19. We decided to go on a hiking and overnight camping trip at Big Bend National Park. It was a place that the three of us had never been to. That afternoon, we drove from Dallas to Southwest Texas. On the way, I suggested we stop to buy some beer to drink around the campfire. Katie volunteered to go into the Shell gas station in Alpine to buy it, even though none of us were old enough. Jess and I waited in the car. We watched Katie walk into the store. 5 minutes later, Katie came back out with her hands empty and a disappointed look on her face. She shook her head when she opened the car door. We all understood. We decided to give up on the idea of drinking beer. We were about to leave when a voice from outside the driver's side window startled me. I turned and saw a young man. He had a friendly smile and bright eyes. There was nothing alarming about his appearance, but the way he suddenly appeared next to the car made me feel uneasy. He offered to buy the beer for us. We looked at each other blankly for a few seconds, but we finally agreed. We figured he was just a friendly person who wanted to help. He went into the store. 5 minutes later, he came back out with a cold case of beer. He gave Katie the change, but instead of leaving, he just stood there as if he was waiting for something. Katie thanked him again, but the man still didn't leave. I felt uncomfortable and quickly started the car. As we drove out of the gas station, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw him still standing there. He watched us until we turned onto the main road. We went back to our camping trip. We didn't think much about it anymore. 2 hours later, we arrived at Big Bend and started our hike into the woods. The afternoon passed normally, but as dusk began to fall, I started to hear strange sounds. The sound of breaking branches, the rustling of leaves. Every time I turned to check, all I saw was the silent forest. I thought it might be wildlife, but the feeling of unease didn't leave me. When it got dark, we lit a campfire and drank our beer. The night air was chilly. The sounds of insects from everywhere created the familiar symphony of the wilderness. But suddenly, Jess stopped talking mid-sentence. She whispered and asked if we heard anything. We listened in silence. Something was moving in the bushes. Katie said it might be wildlife. We decided to go into the tent early. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the sounds around me. The wind blowing through the leaves, the sound of an owl hooting in the distance, and then another sound, the sound of light footsteps. Slowly, it came closer to the tent. I whispered to Jess and Katie, but they were both asleep. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent. I held my breath. I closed my eyes tightly. I wished that the sound would go away. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away. I waited another 10 minutes before I decided to go outside and check the campfire. I needed to make sure I put out all the embers to be safe. I slowly unzipped the tent and stepped outside. I grabbed my water bottle and walked toward the campfire. As I was bending down to put out the embers, a rustling sound right behind me made me freeze in place. I slowly turned around. I was shocked to see the man from the gas station standing just a few feet away. In the firelight, I clearly recognized his purple striped shirt and his face. What made me feel so cold wasn't that he had followed us for hundreds of miles from Alpine. It was the way he stood there, completely silent, just staring at me. I finally screamed at him to get away from me. The man didn't say anything. He took a step back. Then he turned and ran into the woods. I quickly ran back into the tent. My hands were shaking as I unzipped the zipper. I woke up Jess and Katie. I told them what had just happened. We panicked. We packed our things. We only used the light of a small flashlight. The hike back to the car was intense silence. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow could have been him. None of us dared to speak loudly. We only whispered necessary directions. When we got back to the car, we quickly shoved our stuff in the trunk and drove out of the park. The entire way back to Dallas, no one talked about calling the police. We just wanted to get home safely as soon as possible. When we got to Jess's house around 3 a.m., I decided to call the local police in Alpine. I described the man and the incident at the gas station. Katie was worried that we would get in trouble for the beer, but I felt like I had to report it. The police officer took my statement, but he said they needed more concrete evidence to act. They promised to patrol the area more often. Years have passed. We never found out who that man was or what he wanted. Maybe he was just a person with strange behavior, but we can't rule out that he had more sinister intentions. I will never know the truth, but when I saw him standing there in the dark after having followed us all day, it was the feeling of a prey discovering the predator, and I will never forget it. 5 years ago, I was 30, working as an insurance salesperson in Los Angeles. This job often required me to work late, meeting all types of clients in various areas, and that evening was no exception. Around 11 at night, I was driving, searching for a parking spot near a low-income housing complex in South Los Angeles, where I needed to meet a client for the final contract signing of the day. This area always carried risks, and I was used to being vigilant. I was slowly rolling through a deserted alley when suddenly a shadow darted out of the darkness. The person's body slammed against the car window, making me jump and nearly scream. I immediately slammed on the brakes, feeling adrenaline rush. She pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide with panic, constantly banging on the door and pleading for my help. I was horrified to see her lip was torn and bleeding, along with clear bruises around her neck. Her long hair was messy, matted to her smeared face. Her panic seemed real. It couldn't be faked. I quickly glanced at the rearview mirror. The alley was completely empty. I didn't know the full story, but her condition was genuine. I didn't ask anything further. "Get in," I said, unlocking the passenger side door. She immediately scrambled in, her body shaking incessantly. I stepped on the gas, driving out of the alley. We were silent for a moment. Only when the car was on the main road did she start gasping and then sobbing as she recounted everything. She said that about 30 minutes earlier, while buying things at a convenience store, she was forced into a black van by two men. Taking advantage of a moment when one of the men was off guard, she struggled free and ran frantically through the dark streets until she saw my car. My first intention was to take her to the nearest police station immediately, but the girl firmly refused. "No, please. If they see me reporting, they'll come for revenge. I'm so scared. The police will only make things more complicated," she said, her voice full of tears. Her fear seemed reasonable. I had heard many stories about revenge after prison time in these areas. I asked if I could drive her home, but the girl's attitude suddenly changed. "No, don't take me home," she said decisively. "Please take me to this address." She gave an address, saying it was a friend's house about 20 minutes away. This abrupt change made me slightly doubtful, but her pathetic expression wiped away all my suspicion. Compassion won. I agreed and started driving. On the way, my unease began to grow. I glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed a black SUV tailing us. A car with tinted windows, no headlights on, maintaining a safe distance. I told myself maybe it was just another driver. I sped up, and the SUV sped up too. I tried to turn abruptly into a narrow alley, and the SUV immediately followed. At this point, I was sure the other car was following me. "You said you were followed by a black van earlier, right?" "Look behind us." "Is that it?" I asked the woman. At this point, she slightly turned her head, looked out briefly, and then remained silent. No confirmation, no denial. I continued gently but honestly. "I think we should stop at the police station. If they're following you, going to your friend's house isn't safe." Immediately, her attitude changed completely. "I told you I don't want to involve the police. Stop the car. I want to get out immediately." She spoke in a shouting, sharp, and cold voice. There was none of the panic she had when she rushed to my car for help. But, "You're in danger. If they're following, I can take care of myself. You don't need to interfere anymore." I braked at the roadside as requested. She opened the door and stepped out without hesitation. She rushed and immediately turned into a small, dark alley to the right. I stayed put behind the wheel. My emotions were a mess. Suspicion, anger, and most of all, a chilling fear. What the hell was going on? Why did she get angry when I mentioned the police? While I was still pondering, the black SUV slowly drove past my car and turned into the exact alley where she had disappeared. I sat there stunned. I felt like I had just escaped something dubious, and I needed to confirm it. I turned off my headlights, slowly turned the car around, and kept a safe distance. I decided to follow the black SUV. 10 minutes later, I witnessed the entire plot unravel. The SUV stopped. The woman from before was not scared or resisting. She calmly stepped into the back seat of the SUV. They seemed to be talking, with no sign of force or abduction. That wasn't all. After a while, she got out of the car again, leisurely adjusted her hair and clothes, and quickly ran toward a white car parked not far away. She knocked on the car door, and immediately her face transformed. She reenacted the exact same scene she had performed for me, with a panicked expression and a trembling posture. I was stunned to realize it was all a carefully orchestrated scam. I wasn't the rescuer, I was the prey. They used my compassion to lure me to an isolated location, or to rob me right in the car. I didn't hesitate for a second. I immediately called the police, describing the white car and the two suspects. I drove, tailing the white car, keeping a distance far enough not to be noticed. Over the phone, the dispatcher told me to maintain my position, not to intervene, and wait for the nearest units to approach. It took almost 10 minutes for the first police car to appear at the end of the street. I quickly flashed my headlights as a signal. The car slowly approached, then suddenly accelerated, blocking the white car's path. Another officer from the second car stepped toward the driver's side door. They ordered the girl and the man to step out of the car. Her face instantly changed color, but it was too late. She was handcuffed and taken away, still vehemently claiming she was the victim. At the police station, she showed no remorse. In fact, she even counter-accused me and the man in the white car of kidnapping and assaulting her. Fortunately, the white car had a dash cam, which recorded the entire incident. Both I and the next potential victim were exonerated. A few days later, Curiosity led me to drive to the address she had claimed was her friend's house. It was not a house, but an abandoned building, cordoned off for construction months ago. I could finally conclude her real goal was to lure me to an isolated location, completely separate from the residential area. It could have been for kidnapping, robbery, or extortion, but it was certainly a dangerous scheme. Everything, from the fake injuries, the pleading eyes, the change of address, to the constantly tailing SUV, was part of a meticulously planned script, likely part of an organized crime or scam ring. From then on, I never took unexpected pleas for help lightly again. Not everyone who looks desperate is truly a victim. That night, I not only escaped a scam, but also learned a costly lesson about trust. I worked the night shift at a Subway, a small shop next to a gas station where people stopped in a hurry on their way home. The smell of toasted bread, fresh vegetables, and deli meats mixed with the familiar greasy air of the kitchen. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling emitted a cold, harsh glow, reflecting off the glass counter full of bacon and sliced cheese. He started showing up about 2 weeks ago, a middle-aged man wearing a wrinkled shirt, his brown hair thin and greasy. He didn't cause trouble, just ordered a regular beef sandwich with extra mayonnaise. But what bothered me was his gaze. Every time I stood behind the counter, he stared at me. Not the casual glance of a customer, but a persistent, probing look. When I wrapped the sandwich, he asked me what my name was. When he paid, his hand lingered on mine longer than necessary. The next time he came back, still with that look. This time he complimented me, saying I was pretty. He asked if I wanted to go out after work. I smiled politely and declined. But he didn't stop. One night he called the shop, his voice deep and raspy. "Is this Glenda?" I froze. He knew my name. He asked where I lived. I hung up. I told my manager, but there wasn't much to be done about it. "Just a weird customer, don't worry." After that, he disappeared. I felt relieved, but that feeling didn't last long. One Friday night, I finished my shift at 11 p.m. It was colder than usual. The subway glass door reflected my pale face under the dim lights of the parking lot. I took off my apron, adjusted my messy hair before stepping outside. My brother, Mason, always told me to be more careful. He didn't like me working the night shift alone. "Guys like him could be following you, Glenda. If anything happens, call me." Mason had picked me up many times, especially after I told him about the creepy customer. He didn't like the way I shrugged it off when I talked about him, but I always thought Mason was overreacting. That night, I told Mason I could go home on my own, but just 10 minutes later, I wished I had listened to him. Near the exit, a figure stood under a streetlight. I froze. The person was dressed as a clown. A large, baggy red and white striped suit, a curly wig, and a face painted white with a bright red smile stretched unnaturally wide. The clown held out a red balloon to me, swaying lightly in the wind. I didn't move, not knowing how to react. The clown said nothing, just brought the balloon closer. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my chest. This had to be a joke, right? Someone hired a clown to mess with me? I reached out slowly, took the balloon. As soon as I grabbed it, he turned and walked away, quickly disappearing into the darkness. The balloon felt different, like it was heavier. I didn't think much of it, turning back toward my car. Suddenly, there was a loud pop. I jumped, the string of the balloon slipping from my hand. In an instant, a puff of white smoke shot out from the torn balloon, swirling into a thick cloud right in front of me. I gasped in shock, and immediately, the sharp chemical scent hit my nose, making my throat burn and tighten. A pungent odor overwhelmed all my senses, causing my stomach to twist. The more I coughed, the more white dust filled my mouth, my lungs. I staggered, my legs losing strength, and everything in front of me blurred. My throat felt dry, my heart pounded uncontrollably, out of rhythm. My ears rang, and all I could hear was the sound of my own labored breathing, desperate, as if I were drowning. Heavy footsteps pounded behind me. Darkness rushed toward me. He pressed on me. I heard his heavy breathing right next to my ear. I've been waiting a long time for this, Glenda. I struggled, but my limbs were weak. A loud yell rang out. Footsteps rushed forward, and his body was yanked away from me. I blinked, trying to regain my senses. Mason, my brother, stood there, his fists clenched, breathing heavily. The man crawled to his feet, but Mason was quicker. Another punch, this time harder, enough to knock him to the ground. He cursed and groaned, holding his face. The police arrived, and when the lights flashed on his face, I saw him clearly. The white paint on his face had smeared from sweat, revealing pale skin and greasy brown hair. It was none other than the regular customer at Subway. I froze. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the truth. He had always been there, watching me, waiting. I saw Mason say something to the police, but my ears were ringing. He was arrested on the spot, and Mason took me to the hospital. After that, I quit my job at Subway. I still thought about him, regretting not listening to Mason. I wondered how long he had been planning this. How many days had he been watching me? If Mason hadn't shown up, what would have happened? I remembered his face when he handed me the red balloon. It was the smile of someone who knew he was about to get exactly what he wanted. The traffic light turned green. I drove off, trying not to think about what had just happened. By chance, I glanced at the back seat through the rearview mirror, and there it was a red balloon, lying there, rolling on the seat. I don't know when it got there. I still remember that terrifying flight and his haunting face. His smile was so wide it showed all his yellowed teeth, and his eyes felt like they could pierce right through you. It was a beautiful August day. I was on my way from Columbus to Cleveland to meet Nick, a new boyfriend I'd met through a dating app. I booked a window seat to enjoy the view and avoid sitting next to strangers. But the moment Frank appeared, everything changed. He was about 60 years old. The scent of his cologne was so strong I had to lean towards the window. Whether by accident or on purpose, his knee brushed against my thigh when he sat down. I immediately pulled my legs in. Frank introduced himself with a wide smile, revealing his yellowed teeth. He asked me why I was going to Cleveland. I briefly replied that I was visiting friends, then opened the book in my hand and stared at it, trying to signal that I didn't want to talk anymore. But Frank didn't seem to get the hint. He chuckled, asking if I was going to meet a boyfriend. Then he started talking about his daughter, saying she was my age and just as pretty as me. I was really uncomfortable. I bent my head over my book, trying to focus on every word. Frank kept asking if I had Instagram or my phone number, saying he wanted to be friends. I politely refused. He didn't stop there. Frank complimented my skin, asking if he could touch it. I flinched and the book fell from my hands. I refused and seriously asked him to leave me alone. Frank just kept grinning, as if deliberately not understanding what I'd just said. He sat quietly for a few minutes, but his eyes kept staring, giving me goosebumps. I took out my headphones, put them on, and turned the music up as loud as possible, then looked out the window. Listen to me talk. The flight's too long. It's boring to sit in silence like this, he whined. I don't want to talk, I said bluntly. Frank laughed and started talking about his daughter again. I tried to ignore him, not wanting to bother the other passengers, but his voice still seeped into my ears, even with my headphones on. Sweat started to trickle down my palms. I glanced at the clock on my phone. 45 minutes left. Time felt like it was slowing down. Frank continued to ask what I did for a living. I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep, but a moment later, I felt his breath on my ear. I know you're just faking it. I opened my eyes, startled and recoiled, telling him not to do that. Frank laughed with amusement. My heart pounded. I started to feel suffocated in the cramped space of the airplane cabin. His cologne seemed to grow stronger. Finally, the announcement that the plane was about to land brought me immense relief. As I stood up to get my luggage, I felt Frank's body pressed against my back, his breath on my neck, a hot, moist sensation that made me want to cry. I yanked my luggage from the overhead bin, pushed Frank away, and left as quickly as I could, hoping to leave him behind. But he still followed close. Frank asked if anyone was picking me up, offering to drive me home. I didn't answer, continuing to walk quickly toward the baggage claim area. At baggage claim, as I bent down to grab my suitcase, I felt someone touch my hair. I turned around and saw Frank standing very close, his hand just withdrawn from my hair. "Your hair is so soft." At this point, I was in full panic. I looked around and saw a family with 2 small children nearby. Without thinking, I walked toward them. "Excuse me, could I walk with your family to the rideshare area?" I asked. "That man keeps following me." The woman looked towards Frank, then nodded and said I could come with them. Frank stood at a distance, still smiling, but he didn't dare come closer when he saw me with the other family. I thanked them and quickly called an Uber, leaving the airport. When I met Nick, I was so scared, I burst into tears and told him everything. I had been too panicked to call him earlier. The rest of my trip with Nick was very happy. Our relationship progressed beautifully. I thought the incident was over. But a few months later, while scrolling through Instagram, I saw a follow request from an account named Frank_Ohio_62. The attached message had only 3 words, "Miss me." I immediately knew who it was. I locked my Instagram account right away and never reopened it. Although the fear lingered for months afterward, I learned an important lesson about caution and being more assertive in